Conveyancers for Change is a podcast that pulls back the curtain on the legal property industry and beyond, unpacking the issues that matter in 2022 and spotlighting the change makers in a profession that can be highly stressful and incredibly rewarding in equal measures. Expect discussions that challenge the norm and aim to drive change in the conveyancing industry and beyond. My name is Vicky and I'm a formal commercial paralegal with a law degree, and I'll be hosting the podcast with the incredible Aconveyancing, who are a conveyancing firm championing change in the legal industry for legal professionals. On this episode, we're talking about a subject matter that is estimated to have caused almost 1 million women to quit their jobs. It's a subject matter that affects almost every single woman in the world, yet still carries a real stigma and lack of understanding from employers, which is something that needs to change. That subject is menopause. Currently, 3.5 million women in employment are at menopausal age. Nearly 8 out of 10 menopausal women are in work, and almost 6 in 10 women say their menopausal symptoms have had a negative impact on their work. Given that half the UK workforce are women and women make up 52% of lawyers, we thought that this is a conversation that absolutely needs to be had on our Conveyancers for Change podcast. So I'm thrilled today to be joined by 2 incredible women who have both been through menopause whilst working. So we have Sam with us in the studio today, who's an associate conveyancer with the firm Aconveyancing here. And then we also have Nicola Green dialing in, who has developed a career educating employers on the importance and awareness of awareness and support for women going through menopause in the workplace. So really, really important that we have this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Just to take a step back as well, for those people listening, if you're not quite sure about the definition of menopause, because we were talking about this before we came on the podcast, weren't we? So many people either don't really know what it is, what to expect, or can't really articulate actually what menopause is. So for our listeners, the definition of menopause is the ceasing of menstruation, and it's usually identified as having occurred when menstruation has stopped for 12 months or more. And the average age for a woman in the UK to experience it is 51 years of age. I had no idea about that, which is really scary. And then just to really quickly touch on the symptoms. So all women experience menopause differently. Symptoms can be physical, so you can have hot flushes, headaches, poor sleep, erratic periods. But, and I think this is really, really key, the symptoms can also be psychological. It can cause anxiety, low mood, lack of concentration, lack of confidence. And I didn't know symptoms can last up to 4 years as well. So I would love, if you both feel comfortable, to start the conversation by talking about your personal experiences with menopause, the symptoms and treatment. So Sam, since you're here in the studio with us, would you like to give us a little bit of an intro?
So when I turned 40, I got diagnosed with cervical cancer and had to have treatment for that, obviously. That then led me to go into menopause because of the treatment, and my doctor wouldn't help with any advice, kept referring me to somebody else. And so I struggled with symptoms for quite a few years. And then earlier this year, I had a hysterectomy, which put me into surgical menopause. And I've since had HRT, so my symptoms are now being managed and monitored. But that balance, because it's only quite recently, I'm still sort of fluctuating and needing to get that right. So that's sort of what's happened to me. My symptoms varied from really heavy bleeding, carrying changes of clothes around with me to because you just didn't know when it was going to happen, mood swings, anxiety. Didn't have the hot flushes, thankfully. I've not suffered with that one. But that's sort of what's happened to me. Some symptoms are still there, weight gain, bloating, being uncomfortable, all things like that. So that's sort of my history.
So age 40 you were diagnosed with cancer, so you had to go through that, and then on top of that it then pushed you into menopause early, essentially. And then would you mind explaining for our listeners that don't know much about HRT exactly what that is?
So it's hormone replacement therapy. I think you can have lots of different sorts of hormone replacement therapy, and as I understand it, it's not one size fits all, so it can take quite a while sometimes for you to get the right balance. Because I've had a hysterectomy, I have estrogen only HRT, and when you look into estrogen only HRT, I think the body relies on estrogen for quite a lot of things, so bone density, brain function, all sorts of things. So if you're struggling and don't have that HRT, other symptoms will come to light, and I think it helps with health issues later in life if you manage and monitor that. But obviously I'm only just going down that journey, so I'm still not quite there yet, I don't think.
So you seem to know loads about it, and we were having this discussion before we came on the podcast. You were saying because of the lack of support and information and advice and help from your GP, you've had to take it upon yourself to go and research, figure out what's going on. And
my GP wasn't very forthcoming with help or advice, so I had to sort of do a lot of research myself to arm myself with knowledge, to go to the doctor and say, you will give me this. And and there are some really useful websites out there that give you checklists to tell you, say this, ask for this.
Really?
If you suffer, there's some really good websites out there. But obviously, if you don't do the research, you don't know that those websites exist.
So, the fact that those websites do exist, that they're literally advising you, here's what to say to your GP when you're going through it. It's ironic then that it's a known thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
That.
And in part of my research, and I'm sure Nicola will back me up on this, GPs as part of their training don't get trained automatically about the menopause. They can opt in and do that training, but they don't have to do that training. And so I think there's quite a lot of GPs out there that could improve their knowledge, and that would in turn help. So I think it's a huge education sort of that's lacking really for everybody.
Definitely. So Nicola, it'd be great to bring you in now, because obviously you've experienced menopause yourself and you have developed a career educating employers on the importance of awareness and, you know, support for women going through the menopause whilst working. Would you like to talk a little bit about your personal experience and then what it is that you do for your career?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks so much. And I probably should start by saying, as I did to Sam when we spoke before the podcast, that my previous career was in residential property. So, I spent 20 years in residential property before launching this career. And for me, I would say my menopause really started at the age of 32. So that was the first time I went to my GP surgery to ask the question.
Wow.
I asked that question for various reasons. One, because of symptoms, and another because I'd had a conversation with my mum some 9 years earlier when she told me she had been to see her GP and he had told her she had gone through a premature menopause. So that conversation sat with me. We didn't talk about it any more than that. But I guess I always had that in my subconscious. However, at the age of 32, I say I was probably quite rightly dismissed by the doctors. Why would you be considering this at, that age? And I kind of left there at that point thinking, okay, I'm just an exhausted mum, 2 young children, career, so on. I just need to get on with this. And that's really what I continue to do. And I did that for the next 3 years until symptoms quite dramatically changed. And similar to what Sam said, the most horrendous periods, to the point where you didn't feel you could leave the house. The anxiety was there. I was completely I felt like in a hamster wheel is what I would say. So you were going from this exhaustion from these horrendous periods, inability sometimes to sleep, the anxiety was there, their confidence was starting to lack. And I think for me at that point, the biggest symptom I remember is the inability to make a decision.
Really?
And that was tough for me. I was always a leader at home and at work, and that inability to be able to make decisions was really difficult. So more tests at that point for me, including ovarian scans. Maybe they were concerned that I had a thicker lining of my womb, ovarian cysts when I spoke to my GP about those periods. And again, as Sam will appreciate as well, when you get told, oh, we've got concerns here, that just adds on to the way you're feeling already. Anyway, fortunately for me, that was all clear. For me, at the age of 35, it was a blood test that originally revealed that I was going through premature menopause. However, I went on to have some consecutive blood tests that weren't all conclusive. So a sort of diagnosis at 35, but then, okay, those symptoms change because these symptoms fluctuate over the months and over the years. And you never quite know whether it's menopause or if it's life, work, stress, grief, all these other things that you're going through at the same time. So really, really hard to pinpoint. So again, I carried on for a few more years, still with varying symptoms, until I probably would say I hit my rock bottom at the age of 38. And it was at that point that I was back at the GP, and still I had 6 years of experience now. I had 6 years of knowledge. I had partly diagnosis, but I still walked in at 38 and said, am I depressed? And if so, do I need to ask you for antidepressants? Never been on them before. Or is this menopause? Still that time on, you still just couldn't pinpoint it, due again to the lack of education that we have. For me at that point, it was more blood tests, and this time for me again, conclusively showing that I was going through premature menopause. Now, at this point, my GP is recommending HRT to me because of osteoporosis later in life. So if you go through a premature menopause, you are at a higher risk of osteoporosis in your, later years. For me, it wasn't about what my bones would be like in my 60s. It was about the fact that something had to change. And I decided to go on to HRT from that moment. And as Sam mentioned earlier, I would probably say it taken a good couple of years to get my HRT in balance. It immediately helped me. It absolutely did. But over the time, I do believe that you do need to keep tweaking it and working out what suits you and what doesn't suit you. So that's, really important. So to lead you into how I created this business, I suppose, it was that transformation at 38 that made me go, okay, you can see clearly now for the first time in a long time, what is it you need to do for you? Because I'd probably forgotten about me for a long time. And for me, that was a rebuild. So yes, I was on HRT, but it was a huge thing about self-care. What things did I enjoy? What gave me headspace? All those sorts of things. And that went on for a few months. And then I really had sort of another moment as to, okay, you suddenly sort of felt empowered somehow. Yeah. What else is out there in the world? I'd done residential property, say, for 20 years, and I needed to go and see if there was something else. I thought I'd go into a career of HR, and I'd started a qualification in HR, and that led me into this literature coming out saying menopause in the workplace is still taboo. What are we all doing about it? We're now talking about mental ill health in the workplace. We need to talk about this. They are absolutely connected, and they are. And I guess I had my own light bulb moment and went, oh my goodness, I've lived through this. I've held down a career, brought up a young family. Let's see if we can open up this conversation in the workplace. I knew it was taboo, and I knew it needed to be raised. And I developed a business from there. And here we are 3 years on, still talking lots about the menopause in the workplace, and just seeing amazing results by doing so.
Amazing. And it baffles me how, like you said, before the age of 32, because of, what your mum had experienced, you kind of had touched on or had some idea of menopause. And we were saying, I'm 30 years old, and before this podcast and before doing my own research on the subject, I probably knew about 10%, maybe what it was, some of the symptoms, kind of what to expect, but that is it. I'm really interested. before you obviously went through what you went through, in terms of the symptoms and potential impact on your everyday life and how it could impact work, what was your knowledge of it before 32?
Absolutely limited knowledge. And I think for most people, we have this perception that menopause is your period stop and you probably have some hot flushes.
Yeah.
For me, that didn't happen for 6 years. Hot flushes and period stopping wasn't a symptom at all. I had lots of the other ones, but not those. And, I talk a lot about the lack of education, which is obviously part of the work. At school, we would talk about puberty and reproduction. When I was pregnant, I had a midwife and a health visitor. And when this came along, nothing. There's a huge gap there. And education is the biggest thing I think that we can do to help others, for sure.
Yeah. And how about you, Sam?
Yeah, I agree. I was slightly different because I knew that I was forewarned that my treatment may put me into menopausal stage. So I started to read about it and I followed a few Instagram pages and things like that just to get a little bit of education. But had I not been forewarned that that would happen, I would be clueless. My mum was of a generation where you just brushed it under the carpet and didn't discuss it, and you just pull yourself together and get through it. So my mum didn't talk to me about what she went through, so I had nobody else to refer to.
No, and it's bizarre, isn't it? Because my friends and I have never spoken about it, and I have had friends and family members who have been through it or are starting to go through it now. And this is what made me realise by doing this podcast, we've never really had a full-blown conversation about it. It's mad, isn't it, that as women, we don't talk about it because there's still a taboo. Yet it's something that we're absolutely, every woman's going to go through. It just baffles me. Both of you as well, working women, really curious about how the menopause affected you both at work. Going back to that stat again, Bupa reported in 2019 over 900,000 women walked away from their jobs due to menopausal symptoms and the lack of support and education as well provided by employers. So you both, in residential conveyancing, an associate conveyancer, you have very stressful, very demanding client-facing roles where you have to be on it all the time. So Sam, first of all, could you talk about your experience at work and going through what you were going through?
So prior to my time at Aconveyancing, when my cancer diagnosis first happened, my employer wasn't as supportive. It was very often, well, when are you back in work?
Right.
How long do you need? Because you need to be back at work. And so you were almost on a bit of a treadmill, just going through the motions, trying to deal with it quickly. But luckily, Aconveyancing, really supportive employer, and that has helped ease the burden, I suppose, of knowing that you're at work, you may need to go home, sort of without going into too much detail, driving to work, sitting on a towel because you're just petrified that something's going to happen, and being given that flexibility that it's okay and you can go home, you don't have to sort of struggle through it, and sort of that open communication that it's not quite right today. So it's having a supportive employer, going back to the education, knowing it's not just me moaning or groaning and being of a certain age and not being prepared to work. It isn't anything to do with that. And I think the knowledge and the experience that women of our age can bring to the table, as you were saying, those figures are just lost because women feel that they can't cope, so the easiest option is to give up. And those employers, if they're not supportive, are just losing all that experience. And I've been really, really lucky, and I've not struggled as much as other people probably do.
With your previous employer, when you said that they weren't as supportive, was it a case initially of feeling like you were going through what you were going through and you just couldn't voice it? And
Yeah.
you literally had to keep it a secret?
Yeah. exactly that. So it was going to work, not feeling like you were on form, not sort of owning up to struggling and sort of keeping it quiet, but then working perhaps a really long day to make up for the brain fog where you couldn't concentrate. So instead of leaving work at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, you'd sort of take work home with you because you knew you'd not given your all. And I think the majority of conveyancers, we are client facing, we care about our clients, we don't want to give a half-hearted service, we want to be there and do the job to the best of our ability. So when you know you're not doing it to the best of your ability, you have to find that somewhere else, and that 9 out of 10 times was a longer day, which then means you're probably struggling even more because you're absolutely tired and shattered when you're already exhausted.
And then you've got to go home, look after the kids.
And do it all again.
It is just, it is so difficult. And Nicola, I guess that's the thing, it's the element of the lack of understanding, and for so many women feeling like they can't go and sit down with their line manager and say, this is what I'm going through, this is what's going on in my mind. I just really need a bit of, flexibility and support. But then also battling with your own sort of self-confidence and anxiety and wanting to go to work and wanting to be able to perform, but physically or psychologically just feeling like you can't. Nicola, what went through your mind, during your 30s and during your journey from, first sitting down in front of the GP, experiencing all these symptoms year on year, whilst trying to juggle a career at the same time?
It was tough at times, but for me, weirdly, work always had 100%. So for me, it was the home life that had the bigger impact. So to go into work with all those symptoms, sleep deprived, the anxiety, all the rest of it, the kind of work body armor came on, and in I went, and, as much as I felt I, kept performing. However, I was sleep deprived. I was struggling to concentrate at times. Each time, I remember at 38, each time I had a cup of tea in the office, I had a hot flush, and the hair would be clipped up, or you would be putting a fan on, or whatever. But I didn't raise it in work. And that's because I was probably brought up that, you suffered in silence, and you went to work and you got on with it, So, really, really interesting, particularly with the work I do now, which is let's talk about this in the workplace. But the reasoning really also behind that, as we've touched on earlier, is the amount of women. I've met the women that Sam's mentioned who work the additional hours because they feel, and sometimes it's just that perception. It doesn't mean that anyone else is thinking they're not performing as well as they did, but there is that self-doubt, that lack of confidence in our performance. And there's also, the women that I've met who have simply quit. They quit. They don't say why. They've worked in those positions for years and years and years. There's some of them at the top of their game, and they quit through fear of being judged. And that's again why we're trying to work with organisations to show the support, to show it's okay, because we want to keep these amazing women in work. Why would we want to lose them, and all that knowledge? So there's a huge sort of shift now, particularly in the workplace, in order to do that, but also just to support this conversation. And I'm sure Sam will sort of confirm, it's not that women want lots of things from their employer. They really don't. They just want some understanding. They want to be able to have that comfortable conversation. And there's some simple supportive measures to put in place, but it would make the world of difference. I see it makes the world of difference, that this weight literally gets lifted off of these women's shoulders when they know it's okay. And, their productivity and their engagement and their loyalty all just increase at that point, because this is an amazing organisation to work for. So it's simple things that just show the support in the workplace for sure.
So that's it. The Faculty of Occupational Medicine, I've got this another stat here. It says that almost half of women, don't seek medical advice, because obviously what you're saying about, GPs not having that sort of level of understanding. And the majority of women don't feel comfortable talking about menopause with their line managers. And I guess it's that thing, like you say, Nicola, it doesn't have to be a huge policy and all these processes and what have you that come into place. It's, you know, behavioural changes, training. What is currently in place then with your experience in the line of work that you do, Nicola? What is your experience with witnessing how companies have put in that support to help women at work?
For me, I probably should just add there, actually, the work that we tend to do, that I'm doing now, is for everybody. So it's an educational piece for everyone, because my belief is whether you're the individual going through it or not, you are going to be impacted or needing to support someone who is. Okay, so the work that I provide and what I see the workplace doing is educating all ages and genders. So I'm wanting those 20-year-olds in my talks, I want to educate them for the future. I don't want them to, you know, get to this stage and not know what this is. And also they're there to support their colleagues or someone at home maybe. So there's an educational piece there. And it is pulling in everyone. So that's what we're doing to start with. We're educating everyone. We're giving them lots of information and then support to those going through it. That tends to be opening up the conversation in the workplace. And that's what we start with. What leads on from that is manager training. So you can imagine some of the questions are, how do I raise this with my manager? You know, how do I speak to my manager about this? And my sort of response always to that is, I don't know your manager and I can't tell you how to approach your particular manager. But if we train your managers, we're just giving them the understanding of what this is. And we're talking to them about making this conversation comfortable and making them approachable and all those simple things that we want them to be. We don't want them to be menopause experts. Mm-hmm. I'm not expecting them to have all the answers. What I'm trying to do is educate them enough for them to be able to support those colleagues and possibly signpost where they need to. So that tends to be sort of the follow-on stages. And then we go into menopause guides, menopause policies. I do one-to-ones with individuals who are sometimes suffering from overwhelm with regard to menopause and just want to sort of be able to speak to somebody who's not always in the workplace, who can listen and support. And then even for those women going through it, the added on benefit that some organisations like to run is support groups, knowledge share groups. So actually, similar to Sam and I talking today, women going through it who will learn so much from each other if they had an opportunity to talk and share. And those are really good as well. You know, I run those on topics and they work as that ongoing support. This is no longer a tick box exercise. Yeah. This is an ongoing conversation. As we've mentioned, symptoms fluctuate, support will fluctuate. And, you know, this can go on for years and years and years, up to 12 years, at least in some cases. So this is an ongoing support in the workplace.
And isn't it bizarre how so many companies just don't have anything in place at the moment? Have you found that, Nicola, that there is just that complete lack of attention to the subject matter?
Yeah, absolutely. There definitely is for some organisations. Don't get me wrong, there's been a huge increase on organisations understanding the need to address this in their workplace, which is amazing. Some will still have a little shudder if you mention the M word, but others are absolutely on board and looking at it and thinking, okay, we don't want to, pay for staff turnover. We don't want to have to recruit new members of staff. What's our sick leave like in menopause-related sick leave? Again, there's normally no records at all. What impact is it having even on us on a financial basis as an organisation? So that also is really, really key when businesses are looking at, supporting women and supporting their own finances in the workplace. They can do so by looking at this topic as well.
And I guess that's the thing, isn't it? It's a two-way street. It's providing the support for your employees, but then there's also thinking about, well, hang on a minute, I've got an amazing woman sat in front of me. I don't want to lose her. We don't want her to go anywhere. So what can we do to make sure she feels supported? And I guess a lot of it is just starting those conversations, and with line managers as well, what you said about they don't need to feel like they need to be experts. It's just having that training, having the conversations that they feel comfortable if they were to be approached by a member of their team. So having been through it yourself, Sam, what would you say are the steps that employers could put in place, having had, you know, a really great supportive experience from, you know, your current workplace? What advice would you give to line managers or other employers?
I think to make their staff know that it isn't a taboo subject, it's not going to make them shudder and hide under a desk if someone comes to them with the word. And points of contact for people to go to, as Nicola said, just somebody else that maybe has gone through it, so that line of discussion is open. And for people to know it's okay, it's not a struggle, they're understood, and that they can seek help when they need it.
Definitely. And Nicola, looking sort of forward to 2023, talking about you know, retention and how employers can retain their best talent, what are the forward-thinking employers sort of offering at the moment?
The new thing that employers seem to be offering at the minute in training that I'm now doing is even having menopause champions in their workplace. So, you know, many organisations now have mental health first aiders, and lots have understood the need to support mental health in the workplace. What we're now creating is champions, menopause champions in the workplace, where, again, you don't necessarily have to go to your line manager if you would rather go to an alternative champion in that workplace. So that's a new, more recent new initiative, I would say, that the workplace are now sort of jumping on board with. It's keeping the conversation going. It absolutely is. It's not, you know, we've dealt with this, we've popped a policy on our intranet, we've ticked a box. That unfortunately isn't going to be enough going forward. The conversation needs to keep coming. And ultimately, you know, staff will change, you know, not just to menopause, but continue that educational piece, continue the conversation, continue the training, and it will just shift the culture in that workplace, and it will just allow this topic, along with loads of other taboo topics in workplace, to be discussed, and for individuals to be human, I would say, in the workplace, and realise that we are all human. And for those women who, and some of them, I can't tell you, are at desperate measures, to realise that they are not alone is a huge thing for them. The amount of women who thought that it was just them and thought they were completely alone, many feel isolated, many will describe feeling invisible. You know, the fact that they don't feel like that anymore would be just a huge shift in itself.
And for women that may be listening now, going through the symptoms, and maybe some of the not so obvious symptoms, like physical symptoms, you know, you were talking about the inability to make decisions. I mean, I get that when I'm stressed or when it's time of the month. I've forgotten my PIN code or my code to get into my flat or what have you. If there's women that are listening to this now and recognising symptoms and thinking, hang on a minute, perhaps I'm starting to go through menopause, what would your advice be to them? What are the first steps that they can take personally, but also at work?
Absolutely. So I think, when I do presentations, I have women literally going tick, 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 tick. Okay. Oh, I didn't realise those symptoms were related to menopause. So yes, if you start to realise that those symptoms are maybe related to menopause, it's kind of a personal choice, really. For me, I talk a lot about what can you do maybe to help manage some of those symptoms. There's lots of things we can do ourselves to help symptoms. If you are struggling, though, I would always recommend seeking medical support, of course. And I know Sam mentioned earlier, you can go on to the NICE guidelines if you're struggling with your GP to print off and say, this is what I need to ask. And you know, get the support you need. Not everyone wants to go down a medical route. They absolutely don't. But there are alternative therapies as well. You know, I've tried it all, really. Reflexology, hypnotherapy, you know, all sorts of other things that you can try to support yourself. if within the workplace you need some support, then it would be for me reaching out to that manager or to a colleague even, or to your HR department, whoever you feel comfortable speaking to, and just explaining to them. And, you know, being that human being and just explaining how you're feeling and asking for whatever support you might need.
100%. And I think that's the thing as well, isn't it? It's ensuring that women, even within our own sort of friendship circles and, you know, talking with daughters and mums, we open up that conversation. And even if it's just, you know, I mean, you could even set up a little WhatsApp group between friends, just to talk about, oh my goodness, I've gone through this today, or just that people don't feel alone, and having those conversations, shared experiences, because there are things like you were saying, I had to go to work sitting on a towel today. Let's just make that normal. Let's have human conversations about that. What did you do, Sam, when you were obviously going through your experience? Were you able to turn to friends, family members?
Not family members. A couple of friends had gone through it and they sort of gave me some information and sort of what to arm myself with going to the GP. Like I say, there was a lot of Facebook groups, Instagram pages where there's support and you can talk to other women going through it. And I think it's just to not be hard on yourself. And some days you are, obviously, regardless, we all are, but to know that it's not your fault, you're not doing anything wrong, it's natural that you're going through these things, and to not beat yourself up about it. One of my friends said to me, you can't run a car without putting petrol in it, and your body's almost the same thing, and you've taken something away, so don't be hard on yourself. And that's one of the things that I've always remembered. So
I love that, really, really love that. And we were talking briefly before as well, and you were saying about your partner and him making the effort to, you know, make sure that he was aware.
Read up about it. He was really good at sort of understanding, and he sort of looked into all the things I was going through, probably to understand that I wasn't a psycho. And I wasn't sort of just turning into somebody he didn't recognise anymore. But it was good to know that I had the support from my family as well.
Yeah, and that's the thing as well, Nicola, that, you know, you were saying about employers, you know, providing training for all staff so that everyone is aware of it, so that then it's not just their, you know, teams that they're supporting. They can then go home, and if their partners are going through it, just having that awareness and knowing what to do or what to say or how to be there for someone. It's so important, isn't it? And I guess, just to finish, I just want to talk about that, the difference between working in a female-dominated workforce. Would you say that, you know, with your experience, Nicola, do women in female-dominated workforces feel more supported compared to, you know, I was a paralegal at Jaguar Land Rover, and it was, you know, 80% male, and, you know, we were saying before, if I'd have gone to my male boss with these sort of problems, I mean, I don't even know whether I would have had the conversation. Are there sort of different approaches to the different female-male sort of population workplaces?
There are. I think there's quite a split, if I'm honest with you. What I find is there's a lot of women, there's about 20% of women who really won't experience any menopause symptoms at all, okay? I meet those women as well, and I love to get them into the talks because I want them to understand what it could be like for others. So sometimes you find that men can be more supportive than sometimes women can be, particularly if they've not experienced it themselves. I work with often female-dominated organisations, particularly when I'm working with law firms, but I also work with male-dominated organisations, and they are there, yes, to be able to support at work, but they are also there to understand often what's happening at home. And within my work, what I'm trying to educate on as well is, yes, you might be a manager of an individual going through menopause, but you could also be a manager of a partner of someone going through menopause at home. And that can be really difficult for those partners as well. And like you say, some will say to me, she's not the woman I married. I don't understand what's happening here. Some are also coming into work completely sleep deprived. Some have crumbling relationships and just do not understand what's happening. So there's a huge impact to those personal relationships, which can only end up being a knock-on effect to the workplace as well. So yeah, I think it's a managerial kind of state, isn't it? We have amazing managers and we have some managers who aren't so amazing at managing people. They might be amazing at their job. So for me, there's a bit of a split, but I would imagine that if you've got women in the workplace who are going through similar things to you, it is easier to talk about than it is in a male-dominated environment. That could feel quite daunting, depending on who those males are, really.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you both so much for joining us today. Such an important conversation that needs to be had, and I have learnt so much, and we've been talking about it today in here, and it's good to just spark that conversation. And yeah, it's been amazing having you both on, and thank you so much for sharing both your experiences. And it's one of those, isn't it, when women understand and can better understand the symptoms and how to manage them, their lives and their work as human beings can get back to normal more quickly. So thank you both so much, and to all our listeners, we hope you've enjoyed this. It has been such a fab one. So we've got Nicola Green and Sam. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.